Right now, there are over 14,500 active satellites circling this planet, and you depend on almost every single one of them without knowing it. Your phone's GPS, your bank transaction, the weather forecast that told you to bring an umbrella this morning, the plane flying somewhere above your head at 35,000 feet. All of it runs on signals bounced off metal boxes, hurtling through space at 17,000 miles per hour. And we've built an entire civilization on top of that infrastructure, like it's permanent, like nothing could ever touch it. So what happens the second it's gone? What happens when every satellite orbiting Earth drops out of the sky at once? Let's actually think about how many objects we're talking about. As of early 2026, roughly 1,500 active satellites are in orbit. That number has more than tripled since 2019, almost entirely because of one company. SpaceX's Starlink constellation alone accounts for around 9,900 of those satellites, which is more than 2/3 of every active spacecraft ever put into orbit by any nation in all of human history. Add in dead satellites, spent rocket stages, and tracked debris fragments, and you're above 17,000 objects. Then there's an estimated 1 million pieces of debris between 1 and 10 centimeters that we can't even track, and 130 million fragments smaller than that. The sky above you is not empty. It is absolutely packed with hardware moving faster than a bullet, and most of it has your name on it in one way or another. Now here's the first thing you need to understand about this scenario. They wouldn't all hit the ground at the same time. Not even close. The speed at which a satellite falls depends almost entirely on how high up it is when it loses power, and these things are spread across completely different orbital shells. A satellite sitting in low Earth orbit, somewhere between 200 and 2,000 kilometers up, might come down in a matter of weeks or months once it loses the thrust keeping it in place. But a satellite parked in geostationary orbit, about 36,000 kilometers above the equator, could take over 100 years to descend far enough to re-enter the atmosphere. So this wouldn't be a single catastrophic crash. It would be a slow-motion disaster, dragging out across decades, with pieces of the old world falling out of the sky on a timeline nobody could predict. But the physical debris is actually the last thing you'd worry about. The first thing that would happen, within seconds of every satellite going dark, is that you lose GPS. And that sounds annoying. Oh no, my Maps app stopped working. Except that's not what GPS actually does. Not anymore. The Global Positioning System runs on a constellation of 31 active satellites in medium Earth orbit, and it doesn't just tell your car where to turn. It provides the timing signal that synchronizes global financial transactions. It guides commercial aircraft. It coordinates power grid operations. It manages shipping lanes. It tells every phone tower on the planet when to hand off your call to the next tower down the road. There are roughly 12,000 commercial flights in the air over the United States alone on any given day. And the moment GPS fails, every single one of those planes is flying blind in the sky with no air traffic control and no way to know where anyone else is. Pilots would have to fall back on radio navigation systems and visual cues, which works fine in clear weather over familiar terrain, but becomes significantly more dangerous at night, in clouds, over water, or anywhere near a major airport with dozens of aircraft stacking up in a holding pattern with no coordination. Airlines would ground every flight they possibly could, as fast as they could, and the planes already in the air would have a very narrow window to get down before the situation became unmanageable. Some of them wouldn't make it down cleanly, not all of them, but some, and the airports they'd be trying to land at would already be sliding into chaos. Then the communications networks collapse. Satellites handle a massive portion of global internet traffic, especially in rural areas, on ships, on aircraft, and across the developing world where fiber optic cables never reached. Your internet in a major city might flicker and degrade rather than cut off completely, because a lot of urban internet infrastructure runs through undersea cables. But the undersea cables alone can't carry everything. Video calls would stutter out. Streaming services would go dark. Remote servers in other countries would become unreachable for huge swaths of users. And the companies trying to reroute traffic through what ground infrastructure remains would be doing it without the satellite uplinks that normally coordinate the whole system. Within hours, global internet connectivity would look like a city after a major earthquake. Some lights are still on, most of them aren't, and the ones that are won't stay on for long. Your bank account still technically exists. The numbers are still on a server somewhere, but you can't get to them. ATMs run on internet connections. Point-of-sale terminals run on internet connections. Wire transfers, stock markets, international currency exchanges, credit card processing networks. All of it grinds to a stop inside of a day. And when that happens, stores start running into a problem. Not immediately. There's a brief window where cash still works, where people are calm enough to buy what they need and go home. But supply chains also run on satellite communications and GPS routing, which means delivery trucks start missing their windows, warehouse management systems start losing track of inventory, and grocery store shelves that were already operating on tight, just-in-time delivery schedules start emptying out faster than anyone can refill them. The backup systems that modern logistics depends on are either satellite-dependent themselves or simply not scaled to handle a full infrastructure blackout. So you'd be looking at food distribution problems in major cities within about a week. The power grid is the one most people forget about. Electrical grids are synchronized across enormous geographic areas, and that synchronization depends on extremely precise timing signals, many of which are provided by GPS satellites. Lose that timing precision, and grid operators lose their ability to balance load across the network. Transformers can overload. Frequency fluctuations can cascade into regional blackouts. This is not hypothetical, it's a known vulnerability, and it's why grid operators have spent years building in backup timing systems. But those backup systems were built for partial outages, not for the total loss of every satellite signal simultaneously. Some regions would hold, others wouldn't, and the ones that lost power would face a completely different category of problem because hospitals run on power, water treatment plants run on power, and emergency services trying to coordinate a response to all of this run on communications networks that also just went down. What could actually cause this? What event would knock every satellite out of orbit at the same time? The most realistic answer is a Carrington event, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically a solar storm large enough to end modern civilization as a functioning system. In 1859, a massive coronal mass ejection from the sun hit Earth's magnetic field and induced electrical currents so powerful they set telegraph offices on fire. Operators reported receiving shocks through their equipment. The northern lights were visible as far south as Cuba. And in 1859, we had no satellites, no power grid, no electronics of any kind that could be destroyed by a geomagnetic surge. If that same storm hit Earth today, it would fry every unshielded satellite in orbit. Satellites in geostationary orbit are particularly vulnerable because they spend extended time in regions where solar particles can charge the entire spacecraft and burn out internal components from the inside. Hundreds of geosynchronous satellites, including GPS, could be destroyed in hours. And the storm wouldn't stop there. The same pulse that took out the satellites would also damage transformers and electronics on the ground, turning a satellite catastrophe into a simultaneous infrastructure collapse at every level. The other trigger is one nobody really wants to talk about: war. As of right now, multiple nations have demonstrated the ability to destroy satellites with ground-based missiles. China tested an anti-satellite weapon in 2007 and created thousands of debris fragments that are still in orbit. The United States, Russia, and India have all tested similar systems. And there's a growing body of military strategy built around the idea that the first move in a major conflict would be to blind your opponent by destroying their orbital assets. If that logic ever plays out at scale, between two or more major powers, you could see coordinated satellite strikes that knock out not just military reconnaissance systems, but the entire shared communications infrastructure both sides have built their economies on. Nobody wins that exchange. But the logic of escalation doesn't always stop at the point where it becomes obviously stupid. Now let's talk about what actually happens when the satellites come down. Because the image most people have is 1,000 flaming rocks raining out of the sky. The reality is more complicated and in some ways more disturbing. When a satellite hits the upper atmosphere at orbital velocity, around 7.8 kilometers per second, the air ahead of it compresses so violently that temperatures in front of the object exceed 1,600 degrees Celsius. Most of the satellite structure just burns. Aluminum panels, solar cells, circuit boards, structural tubing, all of it vaporizes in 1 to 2 minutes, somewhere between 80 and 60 kilometers altitude. By the time anything gets close to the ground, roughly 80% of the original satellite mass is gone. But that remaining 20% is not nothing. On a single large satellite weighing a few thousand kilograms, 20% is several hundred kilograms of dense, high melting point material that survived the fire. Titanium fuel tanks, stainless steel reaction wheels, optical components made of glass. These things hit the ground at terminal velocity, and they hit hard. Multiply that across 14,500 active satellites, plus all the dead ones, and you have hundreds of thousands of dense metallic objects eventually reaching the surface over the course of years and decades. Most of them land in the ocean, because most of Earth's surface is ocean. But statistically, thousands would hit land. Some would hit cities. The debris fields wouldn't be predictable. You couldn't shelter from them the way you'd shelter from a known hurricane path, because orbital mechanics and atmospheric drag create re-entry windows that span thousands of kilometers. There would be no safe place to stand outside and no reliable way to know when something was coming down near you, because the tracking systems that normally monitor orbital debris would have died with the satellites. There's also a chemical dimension to this that barely gets discussed. When aluminum burns up in the atmosphere during re-entry, it doesn't just disappear. It creates aluminum oxide compounds, and aluminum oxide is known to accelerate the breakdown of ozone. Current estimates suggest that if even a fraction of large satellite constellations like Starlink were disposed of through atmospheric re-entry at once, it could deposit over 360 metric tons of aluminum oxide compounds per year into the upper atmosphere. Now scale that to every satellite in orbit burning up over the course of a decade, and you're talking about measurable ozone damage at a time when every other system on the planet is already under severe stress. Less ozone means more UV radiation reaching the surface. More UV means more crop damage, more ocean ecosystem disruption, more pressure on a biosphere that's already dealing with the loss of every satellite-dependent agricultural tool and weather forecasting system it had. And then there are the nuclear-powered ones. Not many, but some satellites and deep space probes run on radioisotope thermoelectric generators, and a handful of older Soviet-era satellites use nuclear reactors directly. When those come down, they don't just burn up clean. The radioactive materials survive re-entry in forms that can contaminate large areas. The Soviet satellite Cosmos 954 crashed into northern Canada in 1978 and scattered radioactive debris across 100,000 square kilometers. It took an international cleanup operation months to recover the fragments. Now imagine that happening not once, but repeatedly, in an uncontrolled cascade spread across years, with no functioning government coordination systems, no satellite-guided search and recovery, and no global communications network to even coordinate the response. The question of who survives this best is a strange one. Modern cities are almost entirely dependent on the satellite-backed infrastructure that would be gone, which means dense urban populations would face cascading shortages and blackouts almost immediately. Rural communities with their own water sources, local food production, and lower dependence on continuous supply chain delivery would be in a genuinely better position, not comfortable, but functional in ways that a city of 5 million people with 3 days of grocery inventory and a power grid on the edge couldn't be. The irony is that the least connected places on Earth, the ones that never fully integrated into satellite-dependent infrastructure because the investment never reached them, would have the most intact baseline to work from. They never had GPS-routed delivery trucks, so they never lost them. They never had satellite internet, so its absence changes nothing about daily life. Recovery would be the central question, and the honest answer is that nobody really knows. Humans have rebuilt from catastrophic infrastructure losses before. After major earthquakes, floods, and wars, cities have come back. But those recoveries relied on outside help arriving with resources, on global trade networks staying functional, on communication systems in other regions remaining intact. A satellite failure that hits every nation simultaneously doesn't leave a functioning outside world to send aid. Every country would be dealing with its own version of the crisis at the same time, with no shared communication system to coordinate anything across borders. The recovery would have to start from the ground up, literally, with whatever cable infrastructure, shortwave radio networks, and local power generation still existed after the initial collapse. Getting satellites back into orbit is not a fast process under normal conditions. A single orbital launch takes months of preparation, costs tens of millions of dollars at minimum, and requires functional manufacturing facilities, launch pads, tracking stations, and a recovery infrastructure that would itself be dependent on the satellites that just fell. The fastest anyone has ever spun up a satellite constellation is SpaceX, and even they needed years to get Starlink to operational scale with a fully intact global economy behind them. Trying to rebuild from scratch without GPS, without global communications, without functioning financial markets would be an effort on the scale of rebuilding a civilization while the civilization is still trying to feed itself. Some estimates put a realistic recovery timeline at 10 to 20 years before critical satellite infrastructure was restored to something like current functionality. Others think it would take longer. None of them think it would be fast. The Kessler Syndrome makes it worse. Donald Kessler first described this in 1978, working at NASA, and the scenario he outlined is basically an orbital chain reaction. Enough debris in low Earth orbit means collisions become inevitable, and each collision generates more debris, which causes more collisions, which generates more debris, until low Earth orbit becomes a shell of shrapnel that destroys anything trying to pass through it. We're not there yet, but scientists are genuinely debating whether we're approaching a threshold, with some pointing to the altitude band between 520 and 1,000 kilometers as already being close to a self-sustaining debris cascade. If a mass satellite failure triggered a wave of collisions as dying satellites drifted into each other across those altitude bands, the resulting debris field could seal off low Earth orbit for decades, not just making it dangerous to launch through, but making it physically impossible to get a satellite to operational altitude without it being destroyed in transit. That's not a temporary setback. That's a situation where the recovery timeline stops being measured in years and starts being measured in generations. The people who think about this for a living don't treat it as a purely hypothetical. There are international agreements, debris mitigation guidelines, and active monitoring programs specifically because the people who understand the orbital environment understand how fragile it actually is. The Carrington Event is not ancient history. A storm 2/3 its strength hit Earth in 1989 and knocked out Quebec's power grid in 90 seconds, leaving 6 million people without electricity. A storm at full Carrington scale is considered a realistic possibility within any given 100-year window. The solar cycle will keep running whether we're ready for it or not. And right now, we are filling the sky with hardware at a rate that would have seemed like science fiction 10 years ago, while the backup systems and shielding technologies that would protect that hardware are still catching up. Over 10,500 of those active satellites are operated by the United States, which is 73% of all active spacecraft in orbit, mostly because of Starlink. What that means in practice is that a single coronal mass ejection or a single escalating military exchange in orbit doesn't just inconvenience a tech company. It removes the communications backbone for an entire planet in hours. And then the long process of figuring out how you run a civilization without it begins, on a burning timeline, with falling hardware overhead and no clean way to call for help.